finding our way in the dark. Finding our way in the dark. And don't we feel that way sometimes when we're in the dark? Don't we feel like we're lost? But we're not. We're just exploring. I love it. Thank you. I thought this was an appropriate talk because, of course, tomorrow night is the longest night of the year. And the winter solstice. And many of us don't like the dark. I think as humans, we're kind of genetically wired to not like the dark. And yet the dark is every bit as important as the light. Every major religious tradition celebrates something around the winter solstice. All the way back to the pagan traditions at Stonehenge. Stonehenge, they believe, was built, to be at a certain attitude at a certain time on the solstice, both the winter and the summer solstice. The Buddhists have the Bodhi Day on December 8th, which is the day that celebrates the enlightenment of Buddha under the Bodhi tree. Obviously, Jews have Hanukkah. For those of you who've been around the last couple of weeks, you saw the menorahs around here, celebrating the Festival of Lights. Christians have Christmas. You guys all know, no one knows when Jesus was born, right? He was not born on December 25th, right? We all know that. This should not be shocking to anyone. And actually, the birth of Christ was celebrated in the ancient church, started in mid-March, more like Easter with renewal. And that was originally when the birth of Christ was celebrated. It moved in the Greek Orthodox Church to January 6th, where it's actually still celebrated today as the Epiphany. And it wasn't until about the time of the Council of Nicaea, which was 336 AD, when Emperor Constantine had moved into Europe and was trying to Christianize a whole bunch of pagan tribes, that Constantine decided that we would just all place the birth of Christ right on the winter solstice when everybody's partying anyway. So that's why we celebrate Christmas this time of year. So this time of year is where we get to find the light within, because it has gone away outside. Every one of these holidays that I just talked about, the core of them is about rededication. It's about dedicating ourselves to something greater. Certainly, Bodhi Day for the Buddhists is, we heard, if you were at the installation last week, Rabbi Jamie Arnold talked about Hanukkah being a time of dedication. Jesus came, said, I am not here to abolish the law, I'm here to fulfill the law. His whole life was asking people to be rededicated to the principle of this greater love, this greater truth. So this time of year, even though it is dark, it is a time of rededication. Rededication to ourselves, rededication to the truth, rededication to that which we know is greater than we are. And we get to do that at a time when there are tons of distractions out there because it's dark. In an agricultural society, which we haven't been for a while, but in an agricultural society, this is when everybody quit work at 3:30 because you couldn't do anything after that. And you went inside and you contemplated and you prayed. Maybe you read or you did needlework or whatever. But you had time to rededicate yourself to something greater than the busyness and the materiality of this world. And we see this theme through Christmas all the time. I shared before, I'm a Christmaholic. So I love Christmas. But not everyone does. And I've been rereading A Christmas Carol, which I kind of do every year. And, one of the things Charles Dickens pointed out is that by industrialization coming in the 1840s, it was taking people away from that, finding the greater meaning. So today I'm going to ask us to take a moment to rededicate ourselves to that guiding principle that guides us through the dark. And I mean both the dark outside, but also the dark nights of the soul. Those dark times when we might forget who we really are, when we might forget that we are one with the divine, when we might forget that there is a greater thing operating in, through, and as us. We need to rededicate ourselves to finding our way in the dark by remembering that we are the light. So the first thing I want us to do is I want us to shine the light on the principle of non-resistance. And to symbolize that, I'm going to light a candle for each one of these. house. I highly recommend it. Get the unscented ones if you're allergic, but certainly. Because there's something so powerful about that small reminder. If you've ever been in a dark room and you've lit one tiny flame, look at the size of that flame, it's nothing. But it will light up an entire room. So it doesn't take much remembering to shine a light in the dark. When we shine the light on non-resistance, we allow ourselves to let that greater being flow through us. I have to tell you, for years I was the queen of resistance to the dark. I am sure that I had seasonal affective disorder. I would get horribly depressed. Now, because I am a Christmaholic, I could buck up through December. I could make it until like January 1st. You know, I'd go get myself busy with Christmas. But January, February, March, and it was really hard because about the time I was so depressed that I would go see someone about getting on Prozac, we'd go on to daylight savings time, and I'd start to feel better, and everything would be good again until the next January. And I hated the dark. I hated the dark. I would be sad. I would rail against it. I would complain about it. I would tell people, oh God, I hate that it's dark at 4:30 at night. Can you believe it's dark at 4? I hate that it's dark. It's so dark. I hate that I have to turn a light on in my house at 4:30. I hate that I can't read, you know. Well, guess what? I'm resisting what is. There's a quote by Mark Twain. Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Well, because we can't. And I had the epiphany about 5 or 6 years ago when I was talking to my mom. Now, this was an old pattern with my mom. My mom was like me. She complained about the weather. And so I just had this memory. She was complaining about it being dark in December and cold. But then I was remembering back to when she and I had spoken in July, and she was complaining that it was so hot. And she couldn't, you know, she just hated the heat, didn't like the heat, didn't want there to be heat, wouldn't get air conditioning in her home, but hated the heat. And then I remember in the fall, she was complaining that the leaves were everywhere, and she couldn't get to her car without tracking leaves in the house, and that the leaves were just such a pain in the neck. And then I remember to a spring when she was so tired of the rain. We're getting all the rain and cloudiness. And it dawned on me that this is not helpful to us being the light. Non-resistance, resistance to what is, keeps us in the dark. And I would bet that most of us, if you've ever been through that dark night of the soul, it's because you're resisting something that you can't change. When we go to non-resistance, we allow that greater thing to flow through us because we know that we are always okay. There's nothing we have to do or control. We just let Spirit move through us, as us, with us, and then things start to open up and miracles start to happen, and it doesn't feel dark, even if it's dark at 4:30. When I had this realization, I decided I'm going to love the dark. I love Christmas. Why can't I love January? Why can't I love the dark? Well, that was a huge, whoa. At the time, I was living in a townhouse, and I had a dog, and there was no yard. So I had to walk the dog about 4 times a day. And I went from, God, I hate walking around in the dark, to, we're going on an adventure. So I went and I got those little tags they have for dogs that are like little reflector lights that you can put on their collars, because my dog was all black. Try seeing an all-black dog against black grass in the dark, really. I mean, I'm like, is she doing something? Is she, where, you know? So I got her a little reflector light, and I made myself have fun doing this. I made myself go to the pet store, I made myself pick out the perfect color, and every time we'd go for a walk, I would say to her, come here, we're going to get our light out, we're going to shine our light out into the neighborhood. Let's go shine our light, let's go shine our light. Now this was an act of will, this was an effort. I can't say that this was bubbling up from within. This was an effort, but you know what? I made the effort for a winter. And guess what? By the next winter, it was bubbling up from within. I really did get excited about it. I filled my home with candles, and I would make sure that they were candles I really loved. And so I would get excited because I can't really burn candles in the summer because it gets too hot in the house with all the candles going. So I would, yay, dark, and I get to light all my candles. Don't resist. When we shine the light on non-resistance, we find the thing that we can love. We find the thing that will take us out of the path of focusing on what's wrong, focusing on what we don't have, focusing on the depression and the darkness, to finding the light. But we have to not resist it. I told you I'm reading Christmas Carol again. I love that story because the whole thing is about Ebenezer Scrooge's resistance to his connection with humanity until he stops resisting. And that's when the healing happens. When he stops resisting, everything opens up for him. So shine the light on non-resistance. Where in your life are you resisting something? Do you dislike this time of year because it brings back awful memories from your childhood? Unfortunately, we live in a culture where Christmas is going to happen this time of year every year. And it's going to happen big. So don't resist it. Learn to love it. You're resisting the dark? Learn to love it. Light a candle. Then we shine the light on intuition. We shine the light on intuition. Intuition is that beautiful way that Spirit tells us what we need to know. Now, many of us, when we're in the dark, we can't feel our intuition. We don't know it's there. Or we mistake the voices in our head for our intuition. You know, the voices that tell you you have to work really hard, you're not good enough, you're not making enough money, you don't have a relationship, why are you, 35 and still alone, or whatever your particular voice is. Sometimes it's hard to tell. Is that God talking to me? Is that God telling me that I'm, worthless and lazy and that I really should be doing more? Now, when I ask it that way, you guys are all rolling your eyes at me. Like, of course that's not God. But it's harder to tease out when it's in our own head. It's harder to know that that's not the truth. But our intuition, when we shine the light on our intuition, we amplify it. We can practice feeling the truth. And we do it through our intuition. And the way you can do that is match it to what your intellect tells you. You read spiritual truth. You know that we're all one with God, that God loves us unconditionally, that we are whole, perfect, and complete. So when something tells you you're not, learn to say, yeah. And pretty soon you'll start to realize that there is a feeling place in you that does bubble up from within. That when you're with certain people who love and adore you, you feel good. That's your intuition being reflected back. When you want to do something and you feel passionate and excited and you can't wait to get out of bed, even if it's dark, you know that that's your intuition. When you feel like, oh my God, I have to do this, even if it's light, that's not your intuition. That's a voice in your head. And I think many of us fall into that dark night of the soul pattern because we don't allow ourselves to live fully in that intuitive place where we know what is ours to do, where we know who we are, what our purpose is, why we're here. So we fall into that dark place because we continue to believe the story that we should be doing something else that we don't really want to be doing. And when you look ahead at your life and all you're set up with is doing something that you don't want to do, it's hard to feel the light. And that's when the darkness descends. If you can get clear and listen to that intuition. I found a great analogy for this. We're really excited. Steve and I are big Star Wars fans. We're really excited to see the new movie. And if you've seen it already, don't tell me anything about it. We're going to go on this week. But anyway, so in preparation for this, we went back and we watched all 6 of the previous ones. So, are you laughing? That's just totally normal, isn't it? Doesn't everybody do it? And now our only question was, what order do we watch them in? Do we watch them in chronological order the way they came out? Which would be, the one from 1977, and then the one from 1979, and the one from 1980. And then go to the what? Or do we watch them in what are now chronological order, which is episodes 1, 2, 3, and then go 4. Anyway, we chose to do that one, although there's, I'm a purist. I kind of was thinking chronological order, but I went with numerical order because the historical purist in me was overruled by the obsessive compulsive in me. And we went in miracle here. But anyway, the analogy for intuition was great. I guess I knew it, I kind of let you know it, but the force. If you go back and watch these, throughout all 6 of them, it's a theme. Check your feelings. Your feelings will guide you. And feelings of anger and hatred and disappointment and guilt will lead you to the dark side. They lead you to the darkness. So if we're in the dark and we need to find our way in the dark, we have to connect with our feelings of love and our feelings of appreciation and our feelings of our worth. That's the force. I love the way they use that analogy because they never talk about God. The force is never out there. It's this energy that we all have access to, and it permeates through us. And that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say that we want to shine the light of our intuition. We want to amplify it. Because the force is always with us. Our intuition is always with us. And we can identify it. We don't know when we're angry. Don't we? And we don't know when we're not. And so, if we're trying to get in touch with our intuition is telling us that, by God, that person did me wrong. That person did me wrong, and I should stay mad at them forever. That's not our intuition. That's something else. When we go to our intuition, we get to feel good about people. We get to forgive them. We get to let things go. We get to release the past. And so when we shine the light on our intuition, we get to stand in that flow. And so that's how we find our way out of the dark. We don't resist. We allow life to happen and resist nothing. And then we let our intuition guide us on what our next steps are. And then finally, we feel the momentum. We feel the momentum. So we light the candle, we shine the light on momentum. Now, momentum works in 2 ways. Momentum works positively and negatively. I love the Abraham Hicks work. We were actually just talking about it earlier. And they use the analogy of momentum a lot. And they say that when you kind of get into a feeling place, it starts to build momentum. And they use the analogy of a car at the top of the hill. And they say if you nudge that car at the top of the hill just to see what it'll do, and you see it start to roll, and you go, ooh, I didn't want to do that. You get around in front of the car to stop it right then, you're good. Momentum hasn't built yet. There's not a problem. You stop the momentum. If you nudge the car and you let it go, and then you get down at the bottom of the hill as it's come down about a mile, and you stand in front of the car to stop it, you have a much bigger problem. We want to make sure that we shine the light on the momentum that takes us to the light, takes us out of the darkness, takes us to the place where I keep saying it's practice. When you get a depressive thought, it starts to attract more depressive thoughts. When you find yourself in the dark night of the soul, it's very easy to let the momentum get away from you. I was upset about something last night and I just kept thinking about it. And part of my brain's going, stop thinking about it. At the same time, I'm like, I'm going to stop thinking about it. As soon as I get over the fact that he would not continue, let it go. That's momentum. That's what the momentum does. But here's the good news. The same momentum works the same way. Once you get into that place of feeling love, of listening to your intuition, of not resisting, of going with the natural flow of life, the momentum works the exact same way. More of that becomes attracted to you. Once you have a loving thought, more loving thoughts come. That's why every major religious tradition talks about forgiveness. Once you start to forgive, it becomes easier and easier to forgive. So you don't start your forgiveness work with the hardest person in your life to forgive. Don't start there, because you're not going to build momentum. Start with the easy ones. Start with the person who parked too close to you in the parking lot at Christmas shopping, Start with that one. Cut them a little slack. See the car seat in the back and go, oh my God, probably a frazzled mom. I can let this one go. And then work your way up to your parents. Or whoever. Don't start there. Because the momentum will build. And in the spirit of not about momentum. This story kept coming up, and I couldn't figure out why. Okay, so the topic's finding our way in the dark, but I kept thinking about this one woman. I have a quote from her on my refrigerator, and I don't know why she kept popping into my head. And then I read the story online and went, duh. Because this is momentum. I'm going to tell you the story of Helen Keller. We all know who Helen Keller was. Helen Keller was actually born sighted. She was born perfectly sighted and perfect hearing. When she was 19 months old, they think it was either scarlet fever or meningitis, and she lost both her hearing and her sight. She was born in 1880 to an upper-class family in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Her dad was actually the editor of the local newspaper, and so a pretty upper-class family. And so he had a lot of connections. And when she lost her sight and her hearing, nobody knew what to do with her. And talk about being in the dark. I mean, we hear about how if we lose one sense, our other senses take over. But imagine, I think that's usually used for people who've lost their sight with their hearing being amplified, or the other way around, people who lose their hearing being more observant with their sight. Imagine losing both. Imagine, how do you reach someone, especially someone little? So for the first few years of her life, she got the disease when she was 19 months, lost her sight and hearing, and by the time she was 5, she just ran wild. Her parents could do nothing with her. She had a few symbols for things that the daughter of their cook was the only one who could read. Her symbols, they weren't like actual signs for anything. They just, she knew when she was hungry or needed to lay down or things like that. But otherwise, nobody could communicate with her. And because her father was upper middle class, he knew a man named Alexander Graham Bell who had done work with the deaf. That is actually how he invented the telephone, was through his work with the deaf. And so Alexander Graham Bell suggested that they call this institute, and one thing leads to another, and they get a young woman, 20 years old. She's a teacher named Anne Sullivan. She herself is visually impaired, and so she'd gone to the school for the blind. And so she gets this idea to start using the manual alphabet in Helen's hand, and then in the other hand, Helen will hold something. So she gives Helen a doll in one hand, and then spells doll in the other hand. Well, Helen lost her sight and her hearing when she was 19 months old. She has no pattern to match. Doll means nothing to her. Dog means nothing to her. None of this, so it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. The darkness continued to descend. And now Anne Sullivan's starting to fall into the darkness, metaphorically, because she can't do anything for this little girl. And then one day, she stopped resisting. Anne Sullivan said, if I can't help this girl, I'm just going to leave. Somebody can, but I can't. So she quit resisting and actually started making plans about how she was going to leave at the end of the month. And then she got clear on her intuition, and she got an idea. There's one thing that's so primal and so universal that she thought, maybe this will get through. And so she walked little Helen down to the well, and she started pumping the water from the well, and it was very cold. And she put Helen's one hand under the water and kept doing water in the other hand. And at first Helen was so frustrated. She was splashing the water and getting angry, and Sullivan was like, okay, that's it. And then she tried it one more time. She took the water and she splashed it up on Helen's face, put her hand back underneath it again, and something clicked. And Helen Keller got, this cold, wet stuff is this. I get it. It just clicked like that. That's when the momentum kicked in. Helen started running around the yard, touching things and grabbing from Annie Sullivan's hand and getting grass, tree, cat, leaf, all these things. And her whole world exploded in that moment. And she went with the momentum. She didn't stop and go, okay, I've learned 3 words. That's enough for the day. She let the momentum carry her. And then she was insatiable. If you read Anne Sullivan's diary, it's fascinating. She said, I can sleep for like the next week. 3 o'clock in the morning, there'd be, little Helen at my bed, holding something and wanting me to sign what it was into her hand. She couldn't learn enough. But the momentum didn't stop once Helen Keller had a vocabulary. She was the first non-sighted person to graduate from Radcliffe College. She went on to win the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She has more honorary degrees than any other woman in history at the time of her death. There have been a few that have surpassed her since. She continued to learn. Imagine go through Harvard now with sight and hearing. This woman essentially graduated from Harvard. She went on to help all sorts of charities. She spoke all over the world about overcoming your limitations because she allowed the momentum of that moment when her world opened up to carry her to where she wanted her world to continue to open up. We can have that same momentum when we're in the dark. All that means is that the momentum has carried us to the nadir, to the low spot. That's what the solstice is. It's when the earth is the farthest point away from the sun, the North Pole, in the Northern Hemisphere, is at its farthest point away from the sun. And so the momentum of the earth has carried it to its farthest point. But that's the turning point. If we don't resist, and if we shine the light of our intuition, the momentum will swing back the other way. And we will begin to start to feel again. And we will begin to come out of the darkness. And we will begin to have the days get longer, literally and metaphorically. And they will swing all the way back. Now, here's the thing. What happens on June 21st? But that doesn't mean that we have to fall back into the dark night of the soul. That means we just don't resist it. We just get to say, this is the natural order of things, and all is well. Because I am guided and guarded and protected in every moment, whether it's light or dark, whether I'm facing a challenge or a win, regardless of what's going on in my life, there's something in me that is greater than my experience, that is greater than any darkness. And I can stand in that, I can shine the light of that truth year-round. And I know that by not resisting, by feeling my intuition, letting the force be with me, and following the momentum that comes once we start on the path, that I can always, always, always find my way out of the dark. Let's pray. So as we stand here, or sit here in this moment, in the beautiful sunlight, we recognize that God is all there is. That God is that power and that presence and that life that is endless and timeless. It is always good. And it is calling us to our greater good. We breathe into that truth that spirit is timeless, eternal. And we recognize that God is the light and the dark, the high and the low, the narrow and the straight, the good, the bad, the ugly. All of it is spirit. And so I recognize today that that divine life, that power, that omnipotence and omniscience flows through each person on this planet, each person here present in this room. That there is a core within each of us that is the dwelling place of the Most High. There is a place within us that has never been wounded, that has never been hurt, that cannot be diminished in any way. It is the light. And so I accept that as we approach the longest night of the year, that we recognize that that is the natural order of things, the ebb and the flow of life. And that we are able to maintain the light within and the momentum of that light within. We rededicate ourselves to that principle that we are part of the one. We rededicate ourselves to that thing that is greater than we are. And as we do that, I know that we let go of any resistance to what is. We take it as it comes, listening to our intuition to know that it's okay. It's okay to forgive. It's okay to love unconditionally. It's okay to be loved unconditionally. And most importantly, it's okay to love ourselves unconditionally. And as we listen to that intuitive knowing, a momentum builds within us, a momentum of light where we are able to roll that out into the world. And then when the darkness comes, we embrace it. for we know that it is just the first step toward the momentum that brings us back to the light. And so I know for each person here today that we go into this week of Christmas celebrating, rededicating, celebrating a renewal, a personal renewal right here, right now. We commit ourselves to being the light. We commit ourselves to a new way of being in the world right here, right now, where we are able to see the future, to see what's going forward, because we know we are part of that one life and all is well. I know for each person that this week is divinely blessed. We have a new level of understanding and a new level of awareness about who we are. And so I know as the earth begins its journey back toward the sun, that we begin our journey toward a greater understanding of the light, toward a greater expression of the light. And that each person here does it with an ease and a grace that just unfolds from a high and divine place. And so recognizing this cosmic and universal truth, I just give grateful thanks. I give thanks that this is the truth. I give thanks that each one of us are here to individually express our truth. And I give thanks that this is the law that works no matter what. So I just release these words. I let them go because I know that God is good all the time. And that these words come back already multiplied. All is well. We are truly, truly blessed. We just let that be so as we say together. And so